This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former legislator Linda Coleman, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and former legislator Gene Arnold. Before we begin this show, I think all of us here and all of the NC Spin family and a lot of our friends across the state want to wish our condolences to Keith Crisco's family. He was a very fine public servant. I knew him personally as well as professionally, as did I think most of us. It's a great loss, and we mourn that loss in North Carolina, and we'll be thinking of his family. Well, once again, the pulse speed of Raleigh has increased as the General Assembly convened this week for the short session. We've got two former legislators on our regular panel to discuss what to expect and how long to expect them in the capital city. Chris, we'll start with you. The big reason for the short session, of course, is to come back and adjust the budget. Just before the primary election, the legislators got news to expect a budget shortfall of $445 million for the year ending June 30th. Will the $600 million that they put aside for contingencies be enough to cover the shortfall?
It looks like there's a good chance it'll cover the shortfall. The real question, I think, is what happens in the second year or next year, which is why they're here. They're really here to pass the budget for the next fiscal year that begins July 1st. They've had to revise state revenue projections down from 4% to 1.9 or 2%, which is about $191 million less than they thought. The governor released his budget this past week and says it's balanced. I think there's still a chance that we're going to have another surprise at the end of this year. Other states that have made similar tax changes have not realized the same amount of revenue. Right now, it looks like they're going to have enough money, but I'm very skeptical that at the end of next year we won't be in the same spot with at least the same size shortfall.
Well, Linda, as Chris said, the governor did release his budget this past week. It calls for $130 million in new spending. So coupled with what we've just been talking about with lower revenues, does that mean we might be hearing talk of budget cuts in this next year?
I think that you are going to continue to hear talks of budget cuts. I think it's a bad idea to continue budget cutting in a time of recession and also at a time of re-election, but there's a good chance that budget cuts will continue.
The big issue, Gene, aside from the budget, is teacher pay raises. Now, we know that Governor McCrory proposed this past week to give step increases to teachers on the current pay scale that will result in between a 2% and 4% increase. Is that going to be enough to satisfy the teachers?
Well, I think it will, because they aren't expecting any very much. They have gone through 4 years that they didn't get anything. And they have been promised that there was always more to come. I think that you will see this go through, and I think what people don't realize of what the governor has proposed, there are many hidden things like differentiated pay and pay for other things that you do, mentoring teachers, etc. I hope that all goes through so that we can start with those things that are needed.
Perhaps the bigger question, John, concerns the rest of the state employees, because in the budget the governor proposed this past week, he's allocating $1,000 for the rest of the state employees, some of which will be pay increase, some of which will be extended leave time and so forth like that. How's that going to rest with them?
Well, the initial response from State Employees Association was positive. Of course, they're going to say good things about any kind of a proposed increase, and most public employees are always going to want more than they get, but I think that's probably where we're going to end up. The idea of doing a flat amount raise or bonus is not unheard of in North Carolina. We've seen that happen in other years, and the reason you do that is because it's a larger percentage increase at the lower end of the income strata and a smaller percentage increase up above. As far as the overall compensation change, what's going on here is a much larger increase for starting salaries, I think something like 7%, and then smaller increase for the most experienced teachers in the 2% range, and then for the teachers in the first few years, an increase somewhere in between. What that is essentially doing is taking a pay scale that currently looks like this and making it a little bit flatter, which is actually the best kind of compensation reform that we could adopt for teachers. That is the kind of system that is better oriented towards rewarding excellence.
Chris, back to you. The question that in dealing with budget was Medicaid shortfall. Mm-hmm. Now, we were told several weeks ago to expect a Medicaid shortfall of between $120 and $140 million. In the budget the governor proposed this week, he only allocated $70 million.
Believe, right, yeah.
Does he know something we don't?
Well, yeah, I think he does. I mean, I think the folks that work for him at the Department of Health and Human Services, if we could believe their numbers, believe the shortfall is going to be less this year. I do want to make one quick point about the budget, which is interesting. The governor gets a lot of he does make some budget cuts, but he reassigns a lot of lottery money to pay for things like his career ladder or his career performance plan, like textbooks, like pre-K. He even puts more money. So it's going to be interesting to see how legislators start allowing more and more lottery money to go away from school construction, school scholarships, and pre-K, which is what it traditionally was for. I think that's one of the subtexts to this budget debate.
Final question on this segment. Linda, Medicaid reform, obviously, is something that the governor has been pushing for quite some while. If the Medicaid shortfall is not as great as what had been earlier predicted, does that give the legislature more or less incentive to do the Medicaid reforms the governor wanted?
Well, I think you're still going to see Medicaid reform simply because of all of the interactions between HHS and the General Assembly this past year. They're going to want more accountability. They're going to want to see more leadership. So there's going to have to be some reform to Medicaid.
And we'll be, of course, talking about that as this session wears on. Remember, NC Spin's now being aired on Time Warner cable systems, except in the Raleigh-Durham area. To learn the time and channel listing, you can consult the NC Spin website. Also watch NC Spin anytime you want at Time Warner On Demand or the ncspin.com website. We post each week's show on Friday, so view us anytime. And while at ncspin.com, be sure to sign up for our weekly email newsletter Spin Cycle. And follow us, by the way, on Twitter at NC Spin Tweets or NC Spin on Facebook. We want to keep hearing from you. After these commercials, we're going to talk about more legislative issues.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's important for farmers and hunters to work together. Farmers own a majority of North Carolina hunting land, and besides, we're often hunters too. We share the same North Carolina values that we'll pass on to future generations. We share the desire to enjoy the land and our leisure time. Together, we can respect the land, our natural resources, and our privacy.
Every year, North Carolina patients undergo 635,000 same-day surgeries. 72% of these surgeries are performed in our highest-cost hospital facilities, adding as much as $2,000 to every procedure. The state's outdated Certificate of Need law prevents competition from lower-cost, higher-quality same-day surgery centers, inflating healthcare costs and limiting patient choice. Tell state lawmakers it's time to lower healthcare costs now. It's time to make a simple fix to an outdated law, increasing patient choice and lowering healthcare costs now. You can help. Visit reformconnow.com and tell lawmakers it's time for a simple fix to an outdated law. It's time to lower healthcare costs now.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
Let's get our panel to tell us about some more legislative issues that might get the attention in this short session. Gene is a former chairman of the Public School Forum. I know education is one of your primary interests. There's been a lot of discussion about Common Core, dropping Common Core. What do you expect is going to happen in this short session?
Well, I don't think people realize we've been in Common Core for about 4 years now. And there is some opposition to it, but the Fordham Institute graded North Carolina and in the math and science that we were using Common Core standards, they graded it as a B+ and an A-. But the rest of the standard course of study for North Carolina, they graded as a D. So I think everyone realizes we need higher standards. I think this is the route to go. There is a lot of support that is growing behind it now. That all of the people that were running ads, et cetera, that didn't like it have kind of run their route, and now you're beginning to see more support for Common Core.
Let's talk about some other issues while we're on education. John, the court this week, essentially, the Supreme Court essentially halted the stop injunction against school vouchers. What can we expect is going to happen insofar as this legislature and the voucher program in general?
Well, what happens now is that the lottery for children who have applied will be held, and the couple of thousand kids that will be able to get scholarships will get them for the academic year that begins this fall. And in the meantime, there'll be this legal battle that obviously will go up to the North Carolina Supreme Court about the constitutionality of the program. The opponents of school choice have always wanted to stop it before any kids got any money, because then it would be difficult to take it away. Right. So that's the significance of the Supreme Court. The other thing to know about this is the Attorney General was representing the state's position, i.e. the voucher program, but it decided not to appeal to the Supreme Court the preliminary injunction. But an intervener did on behalf of parents.
Was that politics? Why Roy Cooper didn't do that?
I would hope that it was not. It may have just been a difference in strategy, but however you want to explain the decision, if it had been left up to the Attorney General, the program wouldn't be in operation.
Well, I think his point was we don't want the program. A lot of people thought if there is a question about whether or not the court's going to do it, why would we spend all the money administratively, give scholarships to some kids while the fate of the program is still up in the air, and why not let the court make a final determination before we go on with the program?
That was the opinion of the lawyer for the program? That's the way this works.
I'm saying, right, that it doesn't make sense to start something and spend all the money when you don't know the fate that it's going to happen.
That is an interesting policy argument, but he's supposed to represent as a lawyer
all he's doing is
the state.
All he's doing is not appealing. He's not defending the state.
Well, essentially, by not appealing, isn't he?
If it had been left up to Coop, there would not be a program in operation right now. I don't think that was particularly good.
All right, Linda, let's get into the higher education, universities and community college budgets. The governor proposed more cuts to the university system of North Carolina. What's the appetite like over there in the legislature? Are they going to go along with this?
I really don't think so, because I don't believe that we're going to be able to sustain our university's reputation if we continue to make the kind of cuts that have been made. It's considered a jewel. If we want economic development like we say we do, we're going to have to fund higher ed.
Gene, I want to talk about, move on to some other issues. I want to talk about the coal ash cleanup. The governor made a proposal for how to deal with coal ash cleanup. Quite frankly, it got kind of a tepid reception over in the legislature. The legislator said, "Well, okay, that's a nice effort to make. You think they're going to greatly modify what's going to happen?" Senator Apodaca, particularly, wants to go further.
Yeah, I think you eventually will see them having to move these ponds into a lined field or a lined pond. The environment just won't take it, and that's an issue that the Republicans are trying to
All right.
Now, it's important to point out that at the beginning of the legislative session, Apodaca actually introduced the governor's plan as a bill.
But it's also important, Mike Hager, who nobody would confuse with an environmentalist, said basically the governor wants to codify Duke Energy's proposal, not have one of his own, which I thought was pretty telling comments from somebody who's generally not for environmental protection.
Another issue sure to come up is the privatization of economic development. Chris, what's going to happen with that?
Well, I think there's a real move to sort of weaken the original, to do a little bit less. You know, the first deal was to set up a private nonprofit that would actually do the industrial recruiting, come up, maybe even negotiate incentives that the Commerce Department Department, the governor would have to approve. Now there's a push there's still people that want to do that, but there's also people that want to narrow that down and just have the marketing and sort of the selling of North Carolina be private and leave the negotiations to the Commerce Department. That's going to be a big decision lawmakers are going to make this year.
All right, Linda, we also hear there's going to be some tax reform legislation that's going to be put forward. Probably one of the biggest things, obviously a tax on e-cigarettes, but one of the things that we're hearing is they're going to put a $100 cap on privilege taxes for municipalities across the state. That's not going to be very well received by the communities, is it?
No. In fact, a lot of municipalities are really backing away and really don't want that tax. And it's a tax increase, and a tax increase is a tax increase. So these privilege taxes, you're going to hear a lot of rumble about them.
All right. Next, final question I want to really talk about, film tax credits, because there's been a lot of discussion about whether we will, whether we won't, whether we'll reduce. John, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think we ought to call RAP on them, but I don't think that's quite where they're going to go. I think it is possible a compromise solution might be, at least initially, I wouldn't favor this, but to limit the credits only to investments that actually create a permanent infrastructure, some kind of studio or business or something that sticks in North Carolina, and get rid of incentives that simply pay some temps for a while to do a commercial or do a TV series.
Interesting. Any other big issues that anybody thinks?
There's certificate of need.
How's that going to play?
This is an idea that hospitals currently get sort of quasi-monopolies in their areas to do certain kinds of services or have certain machines. Some people want to come in and do some competitive, create some competitive markets. The state limits that. There's a bill to try to lift those or relax those standards, at least for some kinds of surgical centers. I think there's a potential for some movement this year. There's a lot of interest, and not just among Republicans.
Tom, the universities, I'll go back to Linda's question, is preparing for a 4% cut and think that it may go as high as 6%, but 4 is the number they think they're going to have.
Interesting.
One other thing we didn't mention about education, there's a lot of controversy about the teacher tenure, the career status. The governor's even said he wants to revisit the plan that lets teachers get a $500 bonus for the top 25 teachers if they give up their contracts. I think that's going to be adjusted to some different level, or I should be abandoned. I don't think it will, but that'll be a big topic of conversation.
With so much going on, when are they going to go home? That's what we'll talk about after these messages.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely. Building on North Carolina's medical home model, better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
Where do you go when you need to know? ANC makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? ANC members can tell you. Just use the ANC member directory as your guide or call us directly. ANC members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
1 in 5 North Carolinians can't buy healthy foods in their communities, increasing their risk of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and some forms of cancer. Learn more at accesshealthyfoodsnc.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
Well, this is an election year, and most of our legislators have got to go home and campaign for re-election. This has always meant we don't usually see substantial, controversial legislation, but it also means they adjourn pretty quickly. Linda, you've been part of these short sessions before. What's your prediction as to when they're going to adjourn and go home?
I think it will be before June 30th because they are not going to want to be there many Mondays because every Monday will be a moral Monday.
We didn't talk about that earlier. Anybody disagree with that? You think they're going to be able to accomplish all this and get home?
I think they'll have a budget by June 1, but June 30th, but I think that it'll last, wrapping up a lot of this stuff until the 1st of August.
Really?
I really believe it.
A lot of cleanup.
A lot of cleanup.
John, Governor McCrory has promised that he was going to be more assertive in this session. How's he going to work with the legislature? There were some rubs last year. He felt pretty good about what ended up, but how's this going to work out?
Yeah, ultimately they didn't disagree much on what they did in the 2013 session. You're right, the governor was getting used to a different role, and the legislature had already been in place for the leadership for a couple of years. In 2014, I think the assertiveness is already evident with regard to teacher pay, an issue that the governor didn't weigh in a whole lot.
Well, and coal ash in the budget.
But I mean, this is an example where the governor made a proposal. It was pretty detailed. And I think it is mostly going to happen, something like what the governor is proposing, which is probably what he's talking about. If you look at some of the other issues, coal ash being one of them, I think the governor is initiating a conversation, but we don't know exactly what the final package will look like. I think the governor is clearly going to be more involved in shaping policy, and that's not surprising. It will be the second year of his governorship, and he's got his team in place, he's got more experience, more confidence perhaps even. So I think that's understandable.
Chris, he had problems particularly with the Senate. Mm-hmm. He and Speaker Tillis seem to get along pretty well together. Speaker Tillis now has been nominated to run for the U.S. Senate. Is he a lame duck this session?
Well, yeah,
how potent and powerful is he going to be?
Well, I think there are a couple things. One is it's pretty unusual to have a sitting head of one of the chambers running for a statewide office, any office, especially a federal office. There's a lot of national attention on the race. Or national, the New York Times and Washington Post and other people.
Although Kay Hagan did that, we have to say she did that in 2008.
Right, but she wasn't the head of the chamber deciding what was going to be heard or not. But we've had a lot. There's a ton of national attention. National reporters were all over Raleigh this past week watching him. So I think it does change the dynamic. I disagree with John a little bit about McCrory's successes last year, and he said he had a great year last year and is going to be more assertive. Already, Tom Apodaca was saying he was surprised that neither Berger or Tillis were at McCrory's recent education announcement, and that the governor's coal ash plan doesn't go far enough, even though he introduced it. I still think the General Assembly thinks they're in charge in Raleigh until McCrory confronts them and demands they do something they don't want to do and makes it happen. He hasn't done that yet.
Well, the Constitution I read says they are.
Well, no, the governor has to sign it.
Yeah, he's got to sign it.
He's got to sign it, and he can veto stuff.
All right. So, Linda,
I want to just say something about Tillis's influence. I think that he is going to have influence until he leaves, because he is the speaker and he can control the flow of legislation, and he can decide what gets heard and what doesn't get heard.
And a lot of people are going to be wanting him to help them when he gets elected to the U.S. Senate.
Republicans don't want to hurt his Senate chances, which is why he may actually have a lot of sway.
All right, after these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
If CON laws were reformed and we had more choice and control to help our patients arrive at a better outcome faster, that's the goal for everybody. And having more choices, it invariably would provide quicker access, control of the quality of images, which is a big difficulty. And most importantly, being able to have competition for price controlling ultimately translates to less dollars by the patient. I am Dr. Sean Hawker, and I support Certificate of Need reform.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
NCAnimalAg.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
Many of you tell us that every week that this is your favorite segment of the whole show, where we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. John Hood, I'm going to start with you.
Tom, do you remember the Randy Parton Theater? The
oh, yes, we talked about that once or twice.
Economic Development Project that keeps generating headlines. Well, believe it or not, there is another attempt to involve Randy Parton and the Parton family in an economic development project, this time in western North Carolina. Not a lot of traction yet, but it'll generate some more fun news.
Randy Wood West. Is that what we're talking about?
Burt County.
Burt County.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I thought we were done with that topic. I'm going to have to resurrect it. Linda Coleman, tell us something we don't know.
I would say the independents are leaning toward the Democrats, and the Tea Party is losing sway, so the Democrats may pick up some seats in some competitive districts.
Interesting. Gene Arnold, tell us something we don't know.
There are growing coalitions just starting of business people and educators to fight for Common Core. Also, existing organizations are combining with them. So I think you're going to see a lot more evidence of people who want to pursue Common Core in North Carolina.
Putting together campaigns.
The big stick the business people are using is a threat with campaign contributions could slow down.
Interesting. Chris, tell us something we don't know.
Under a law passed by the previous General Assembly, the lawmakers have to confirm appointments to the Industrial Commission, which a lot of people don't usually hear about, which decides not only workers' comp claims, but actually is going to be deciding who gets eugenics payments. The governor's appointment is very controversial, and I think you'll hear a lot more about the Industrial Commission this session because of this pick the governor has made that lawmakers have to confirm.
And there's some complaints about the fact that he was late or tardy in making those appointments. Interesting. So we'll look for that in days to come. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.